You know how certain games have those special moments that elevate the entire game, that stand out as that scene, regardless of how off the wall the game may already be. The moments where you unknowingly have a big grin on your face, fully absorbed. The Armstrong finale of Metal Gear Rising, the Ashtray Maze in Control, and that song in Alan Wake 2. Getting the souped up version of the gravity gun in Half-Life 2. Everyone can recall a gaming moment like this. They stand out as cathartic, powerful, just plain peak fun moments, not just in the game, but sometimes the genre itself. I mention this because to talk about Final Fantasy XVI is to acknowledge immediately it is full of these moments. Every chapter ends with one. These bombastic moments, accompanied by a fittingly sweeping orchestral soundtrack, are the highlights of Final Fantasy XVI, and they alone are worth the price of admission. They mark a new approach to the Final Fantasy experience, an approach that's shown again in the way its story and gameplay are delivered. But in going in this new direction, does Final Fantasy XVI lose what makes Final Fantasy Final Fantasy? Final Fantasy XVI is a game of 3 parts: story, gameplay, and item battles, and the story is a fitting place to start. The setting is Valisthea, a world split into 2 continents named Ash and Storm. Upon these continents are huge crystals named Mother Crystals, a source of energy, commerce, and for some, the ability to wield magic. In this world, those that bear magic are shunned for this skill, and used as slaves to work menial labour. The result is petrification for the slaves, caused by overuse of magic. As well as the mighty crystals, Valisthea is home to 8 icons, hugely powerful beings, each corresponding to a natural element, each manifesting in a single human who are known as dominant. Across Valisthea are a number of nations in conflict, possessing their own dominance and ideas around how to utilise them for political gain. Without going further into it than this, it's suffice to say that Final Fantasy XVI has taken a leaf from more contemporary popular fantasy fare and aimed for a story that is initially driven by grim and serious political rivalries, with families spearheaded by dominance representing those different factions. If it sounds a little Game of Thrones-like, it is. The story wrestles with themes of free will and differing values and how these are measured, through the lens of topics like slavery and duty and the bond between family. This approach to story meshes traditional Final Fantasy fare, such as the use of crystals, humanity using and abusing natural resources, and fan favourite summons comfortably into a more mature approach in its thematic story considerations. The story is also a personal one, told through the lens of a central character. You play as Clive Rosefield, the firstborn son of Rosaria's ruling family. He's tasked with being a guardsman for his younger brother Joshua, who is the dominant of fire, the Phoenix. Very quickly, however, the plot unfolds, nations attack and Clive loses his cool, throwing a huge spanner in the works and dueling nations, and a mysterious blight affecting the world. The story remains fixed on Clive as he works through a number of personal issues: his role as a discarded son, his relationship with his brother, his role as a dominant, and his role moving forward as an enactor of change in the world. I liked Clive. His role in the story is easy to sympathise with initially, and his attitude towards the problems he faces is straightforward and headstrong. And whilst he's mostly a more noble character and goes out of his way to help others, certain scenes and dialogue show a biting, sometimes darkly humorous streak to him, which I also enjoyed. That being said, this is a more serious Final Fantasy than recent efforts. While the game contains Final Fantasy mainstays like Crystals, Chocobos, Moogle, and a few others, in other ways it feels more modern, the world possessing a medieval and grim aesthetic, the cast supporting regional British accents, and very few magical abilities such as spells. The game has a consistent, gritty, gothic tone that's carried very well by Clive in a gruff and rugged way. He's a castaway son from a noble house, but has a strong sense of duty, loves his family, is skilled with sword, has a big wolf companion, wears all black, and has long, scruffy hair. Reminds me of some other fantasy guy, John Simpson. The comparisons to Game of Thrones are obvious, and it's no criticism. Clive is an older fantasy protagonist in what strives to be a more grounded fantasy world, and taking inspiration of one of the most critically acclaimed fantasy series works there are. Jokes aside, what also works is the relationship between Clive and his brother Joshua, and its development and relationship to the wider story as well. Joshua serves as both an instigator and driving factor for much of the story, and despite the difficult circumstances of their birth, the game does a good job at showing the positive relationship they have. Unfortunately, the wider cast aren't shown as much development as Clive, intentionally, as the character developers state. Final Fantasy XVI story, however, has since the early concept phase always been about Clive. If you're looking for a traditional, party-based Final Fantasy, this isn't it. Characters such as Gaz and Cid offer some welcome camaraderie and banter as you play through the game, some of which was authentically funny, sometimes intentionally cringy. But for me, that's as far as it went with these two guys that I sort of liked having around. The same could also be said for Jill. Whilst playing, I hoped she didn't, and her role in the story becomes that as a love interest and support to Clive. This appears to be a common criticism in regard to Jill around the way. And whilst her relationship develops naturally with Clive, it's difficult not to think about how else she may have been utilised from a plot perspective. Whilst the narrative strength around Clive's story is compelling, and most will want to see it through, I believe there was room for more in regard to the side characters, even at the expense of Clive's story. Supporting cast are likeable, and more time with them would have been welcome. I said the game was made of 3 parts, and the final 2 both concern the types of gameplay. There is a big split in how the game plays between sections. I will first talk about what, for many, will be the highlight of the game, the icon battles. These are the standout moments mentioned at the beginning of this piece. In previous Final Fantasy games, you would summon these huge deities to cause immense damage in a special attack and then leave the battlefield. In Final Fantasy XVI, you not only transform physically into one of these icons, Ifrit, you then go on an epic, protracted kaiju battle against one another. These are the highlights of the games, and as you work through them, you will gain some new abilities to keep them fresh. There is very little to criticize about these moments because they are deliberately over the top, perfectly curated moments. Brawling godlike beings, slamming into each other, slamming each other through mountains, or falling from space while trading blows. The only thing to criticize is that they are very curated. You cannot organically transform into the icon. These moments are designed for the player during the climax of each chapter. That said, the game does a good job at weaving the story beats into the crescendo moments of these battles, with many of the game's best lines or most entertaining moments happening here. Which brings us to the other half of gameplay. Eschewing turn-based and confidently stepping into the realm of action RPG, the combat in this iteration plays like a cross between Devil May Cry and God of War, with DMC-style movement, swordplay and combo iteration, and God of War-style abilities. Each icon defeated unlocks a new subset of abilities based upon that icon. Some of these are very fun. For example, Titan's shields, counter, and extremely fast punch attacks just feel straight up fun to use. And every icon also offers a different inherent ability, from parrying to grabbing and pulling attacks, to charging up special ability. These are easily switched between on the fly, bouncing between different icon special abilities whilst also attacking with your sword, and rudimentary belt attack as you wait for your abilities to become usable again. It's a ballet of chaos. This is further supplemented by the ability to send Torgal, your wolf, into attack enemies or help heal you. On top of this, there is a special, semi-primed mode, think Devil Trigger and DMC, that acts as an in-between for Clive's normal mode and his dominant Ifrit transformation. In between icon battles, you will be traversing diverse landscapes and getting into small skirmishes routinely, mostly against mainstay Final Fantasy enemies, given a more realistic makeover. You are limited to 3 abilities at any given time, and I think this ultimately becomes detriment towards the game. The game is well over 50 hours, and by the end, using the same 3 abilities in some of the lengthier battles become almost a chore, waiting for their ability meter to refill as you use the same sword combo attacks you have for the last 50 odd hours. I think this could have been prevented if, as the game transitioned towards its final hours, the 3 ability limitation was removed and increased. This would have introduced some much needed experimentation, lent some of those final battles some more complexity and excitement, and ended the game with Clive being a veritable powerhouse outside of the icon transformations, tying his ascent as a powerful dominant to gameplay more thoroughly. The combat kept me entertained for almost the entire game, but towards the end, there was a slight slump. Unfortunately, Final Fantasy XVI is also at its weakest during these moments of gameplay.
I noticed that. But this soil's not going to collect itself.
Then what if I gathered it for you? You could head back to the hideaway. Just exactly what sort of dirt is it that you need?
What I need is soil. But I'd be a fool to refuse your help after what just happened. It's the good stuff you're looking for. Dark, rich, fragrant. You'll know it when you find it.
with some side quests having you go back and forth between areas you've already visited, fight enemies you already have, to speak to an NPC you've already spoken to before. Some of these were just simply dull to play, not distracting enough from the main plot or interesting enough to warrant as diversions away from it. The standout side missions were those involving the main cast, each having a handful of quests personal to them, and the hunts, aptly named missions where you face off against sub-bosses or variations of normal enemies and receive awards. The game needed more of these types of missions. The best that can be said for some of these other side missions is that they offer opportunities to use some newly unlocked abilities, but if those abilities aren't interesting to you and you like your current build. Speaking about builds, I feel Final Fantasy XVI also lacks in itemization. Every new weapon you find is almost always a blanket upgrade of the previous one, and if a new weapon is available to craft, those materials will almost certainly be locked behind the next available side quest or hunt. There are a host of accessories that Clive can adorn that range from specific boosting attacks to adding more experience, to slowing down time just before an enemy lands a hit. If you like experimenting and fine-tuning your build, accessories are where you'll find some enjoyment. That said, I mostly kept the same accessories equipped the entire game and felt no major compulsion to change them. I think the game may have also benefited from some slight cosmetic options. Free DLC has given one alternative costume for some of the characters, but mostly the only thing you'll change is the sword or Clive's back. There are also a multitude of different items for healing and boosting attack and or negating others. I never needed them and took little notice of them. When I think back to my time with Final Fantasy XVI, what sticks out most are the icon battles and Clive's story. Clive is a compelling character and we follow him for 3 decades of his life. He's well voice acted by Ben Starr, who delivers Clive's lines with gravitas. His story split between seeking personal revenge and becoming embroiled in an uprising. This is a more mature tale and an evolution in Final Fantasy in many ways. Story, combat and party all diverge from typical Final Fantasy fare. It manages to maintain most of its Final Fantasy-ness with the inclusion of series of mainstays, Cid, Mughals, crystals and certain items that help smooth the transition, respecting the Final Fantasy's identity despite moving away from so many of its staple elements. I enjoyed my time of Final Fantasy XVI and appreciate the risks the developers took.
So get something else.
But I want Final Fantasy.
Are you telling me that out of this entire store, thousands of movies and video games, there's nothing here that interests you?
You're not gonna like the answer.